Once we know how to work with gradients in our .NET Maui applications, let's proceed to create a gradient for our application. We have already seen previously how to work with linear gradients, therefore this is the type of gradient that I'm going to use in the application. I'm going to indicate that I want an endpoint equal to 1, 1, and as part of the gradient stop collection, I'm going to use a set of different gradient stops that I have previously prepared, which are the ones that we can see on the screen. We currently have 5 gradient stops, although in the final application we're going to use more. In fact, we can use as many as we want. In this case, I'm indicating that I want a separation of 0.25 between each one of the gradient stops, so that they have a uniform continuity between each one of them. We have a starting color, we have a final color, and look how the gradient changes as we go between the gradient stops. Let's see what the application looks like, and we see how the application has taken on a nice visual appearance. Next, we need to change the gradient dynamically by pressing the button. How can we do this? Well, let's go back to the button that's on the second grid. We have the button here, and we're going to assign it a name. For example, btn generate quote. We're also going to create the event handler for the button. We save the changes, and if we go to the code behind, we already have the event handler where we will generate a new quote and change the color dynamically. Now, to generate a gradient dynamically, we would have to make a series of calculations and obtain a color transition between the initial color of the gradient and the final color. To avoid this task, which could complicate the example, we will proceed to use a NuGet package that will provide us with this functionality in a very simple way. We're going to right-click on the solution, we indicate that we want to manage the NuGet packages, and we're going to proceed to look for a package called color utility. We're going to select this package, and we're going to perform its installation in the project. Once the package has been installed, let's go back to the code behind of this page, and as part of the NuGet package, there is a method and a class that will allow us to obtain the colors of a gradient. I'm going to proceed to define a variable called color. We're going to indicate that we want to use the namespace color utility. We have a class called color controls, which in turn has a method called getColorGradient, which is going to allow us to obtain a series of colors from an initial color and a final color. In fact, we can review the definition of the method invocation. We see that it asks us for an initial color, a final color, and the important thing is that we can specify a number to indicate how many transition colors we want between the initial color and the final color. So we see that it is a package that will facilitate the creation of the project, since it will allow us to generate the colors in a very simple way. But a very important point is that each of the colors that we must pass to the method belong to the namespace system.drawing.color. So we must match this type of color with the type of color that accepts a .NET Maui application. Let's proceed to comment this line momentarily to generate the pairs of colors that are going to be randomized. Let's start by creating a new variable called startColor that is equal to, and let's create a new instance of the namespace we saw earlier. Let's specify system.drawing.color, and we have a method called fromARGV, which we will invoke using a random type, which we are going to define at the top. We indicate that we want a number between 0 and 225. We're going to copy this line a couple of times more, and already with this we can generate a new color that is of that type that we saw that accepts this method. I'm going to proceed to copy this line. I'm going to paste it once more, and I'm going to change the name of the variable to endColor. With this, we will generate a random initial color and a random final color. Once we have done this, we're going to uncomment this line that we have previously commented. We're going to rename the variable to colors, and we can now pass start color, end color, and also the amount of colors we want to generate, which in our case are going to be 6 different colors. Let's proceed to define the section to create each one of the gradient stops that we need for the background of the grid, indicating that we need a floating variable called stop offset, which is equal to .0f. This value will serve to indicate the distance that will exist between each of the gradient stops. The next step is to declare a variable called stops, which will be equal to a new collection of gradient stops, that is, a new instance of gradient stop collection. Let's go through each of the colors previously obtained using a for each. Inside the for each, let's indicate that we want to add to the collection the color of the iteration, so let's specify stops.add, and we're going to indicate that we want to add a new gradient stop to the collection. But notice that this gradient stop is going to receive a parameter type color, and if we check this color, we see that it is a different type than the color that we defined previously, which is part of this namespace. Therefore, what we're going to do is to use the class called color that is part of Microsoft.NET-MAUI.graphics, and we're going to use a method called fromARGV, passing it as parameter the color of the iteration, and as part of it we have a property called name, which is going to provide us with the hexadecimal value of the color, which fortunately is compatible with the value of the method. We're going to pass the property, and as a second parameter we pass stop offset, which is the offset that initially is going to be equal to 0. Finally, as part of the for each, we're going to indicate that we want to increment the stop offset plus equal to .2 to create a spacing between the first gradient stop and the others. Once we have created the collection of gradient stops, it is time to create the gradient. To do this, let's define a variable called gradient, which is equal to a new instance of linear gradient brush. Let's indicate that we want to pass the collection of gradient stops, and we will also specify what will be the starting point and the end point for this gradient. We're going to indicate that the starting point is going to be at location 0, 0. This according to the linear gradient brush definition of the SAML file, and we're going to specify that we need a new position specified at location 1, 1. With this, we have finished the gradient, which has randomly generated gradient stops, and the last step is to assign the background to the grid, which is this first grid we see here. Let's proceed to remove the background color, and in its place, let's put a name that is equal, for example, to background, to be able to access it from the code behind. We return to the code behind, and we are going to indicate background.background is equal to gradient. With this code that we have created, we're going to proceed to test the application. Once it has been deployed, let's proceed to press the button, and notice how we can already generate a new random color each time we press the button.